President Biden arrived today in Egypt for the COP27 annual global climate meeting. He's expected to make the case for American leadership in the fight to limit greenhouse gas-causing climate emissions. The centerpiece of the administration's climate initiative is the Inflation Reduction Act. The act will spend billions to cut U.S. emissions in half by 2030. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi spoke at a panel with U.S. lawmakers Thursday. She said the administration is hoping to work with those who will be most affected by a warming planet.
In every way, the president has said, when we do this, we want to do it right. And to do it right, we have to listen to those who are affected the most, whether it's the vulnerable nations or the vulnerable people in our own community.
Biden's attendance at the UN climate conference in the resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh is the first stop on an around-the-world trip that will also take him to a meeting of Southeast Asian leaders in Cambodia and a group of 20 meeting for leaders of the world's largest economies in Indonesia. At the climate conference, Biden will also discuss a new supplemental rule coming today that cracks down on methane emissions, a measure that expands on a similar regulation his administration released last year. The 2021 rule targeted emissions of methane coming from existing oil wells. A federal judge in Texas blocked President Biden's plan to forgive student loan debt for millions of borrowers. The plan provides up to $20,000 apiece in federal student loan forgiveness. The program was already on hold while a federal appeals court in St. Louis considers a separate lawsuit by a half-dozen states challenging it. District Court Judge Mark Pittman said Thursday that the program usurped Congress's power to make laws. Pittman is a Trump appointee. The debt forgiveness plan would cancel $10,000 in student loan debt for those making less than $125,000 or households with less than $250,000 in income. Pell Grant recipients would get an additional $10,000 in debt forgiveness. Vice President Harris and First Lady Jill Biden will attend the annual wreath-laying ceremony at the Arlington National Cemetery outside Washington for Veterans Day. This is the first Veterans Day since President Biden signed legislation expanding health care for service members who were exposed to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan or to chemicals that were used in previous conflicts. The administration says more than 137,000 claims involving toxic exposure have been filed. The Department of Veterans Affairs also began asking veterans about possible toxic exposure earlier this week in an attempt to identify any health complications. The legislation, known as the PACT Act, was a priority for Biden. His eldest son, Beau Biden, died of brain cancer in 2015, several years after he was exposed to a burn pit during military service in Iraq. Ukrainian forces have reportedly arrived in the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson after a withdrawal by Russian troops. The Russian Defense Ministry says it has finished pulling out its troops from the western bank of the Dnieper River in Ukraine's southern Kherson region. Kherson was the only major city captured by Russian forces. Feature Story News' James Gooderson reports.
It's thought that as the Russians retreated, they've potentially blown up some bridges, laid a lot of landmines in that area as well, which will take some time for the Ukrainian armed forces to clear. Volodymyr Zelensky spoke last night as well. Here's what he had to say.
I thank all our heroes who make this advance possible. Armed forces, intelligence, special services, everyone. Now about 170,000 square kilometers remain for demining.
We are getting the sense that as we get closer and closer to Christmas, the weather's going to get colder and colder, and the idea of close-quarter combat is something that will recede during the winter months. Instead, there will be sort of, as we've already seen, targets on Ukrainian energy supply and other facilities. And then potentially, as the snows thaw, things may get quite forward and aggressive when we get into spring.
That's James Gooderson, and I'm Max Pringle. You're listening to Sojourner Truth on Pacifica Radio.